But mastery does not mean forcing the mind into silence. The mind will continue producing images, memories, fears, desires, and questions. That is its nature. The goal is not to stop thought completely. The goal is to stop becoming a prisoner of every thought that appears. There is a profound difference between having a fearful thought and becoming a fearful person, between remembering failure and identifying yourself as a failure, between noticing uncertainty and surrendering your future to it. The mind may speak, but you are not required to obey. This is where many people misunderstand self-control. They imagine that strong people never experience doubt, anger, envy, or fear, but the disciplined person still experiences all of them. The difference is that these emotions do not immediately take command. They are heard, examined, and placed in perspective. A strong mind is not a mind without storms. It is a mind that has learned how to remain standing while storms pass through. When anger appears, it often arrives disguised as certainty. It tells you that you are completely right and the other person is completely wrong. It shortens your vision. It makes revenge feel like justice and impulsiveness feel like courage. In that moment, the mind does not want reflection. It wants release. It wants to say the sentence that cannot be taken back. It wants to send the message that will create another conflict. It wants to win immediately. Even if winning destroys something valuable, the Stoic response is not weakness. It is delay. Seneca warned that anger is a temporary form of madness because it removes reason from the throne and replaces it with impulse. The wise person creates distance before acting. They may walk away. They may wait until the body becomes calmer. They may ask whether the issue will still matter tomorrow, next month, or next year. This pause does not deny the problem. It prevents the problem from becoming larger through an undisciplined reaction. How many regrets began with a thought that was never questioned? How many relationships were damaged because someone believed the first interpretation that entered their mind? How many opportunities were abandoned because fear predicted humiliation? How many years were wasted because one failure became a permanent identity? Your thoughts do not remain inside your mind. They become tone, posture, habits, decisions, and eventually consequences. A person who repeatedly thinks, "There is no point," begins moving through life without effort. A person who thinks, "Everyone will betray me," begins behaving with suspicion until trust becomes impossible. A person who thinks, "I must never look weak," becomes unable to apologize, ask for help, or admit confusion. In every case, the thought creates the behavior, and the behavior eventually creates evidence that seems to confirm the thought. This is how a mental prison builds itself, brick by brick, belief by belief, reaction by reaction. And because the prison is invisible, the person may spend years blaming the world for walls created by repeated interpretation. To master your thoughts, you must first become willing to challenge the stories that protect your old identity. This is difficult because even painful beliefs can feel familiar. A person may say they want confidence, but a hidden part of them remains attached to the belief that they are incapable. That belief excuses them from risk. If they never try fully, they never have to face the possibility of genuine failure. A person may say they want peace, but they continue replaying old arguments because anger gives them a sense of moral superiority. A person may say they want freedom, but they remain loyal to resentment because resentment connects them to the past. The mind does not always resist healing because healing is impossible. Sometimes it resists because healing requires the loss of a familiar story. You may have told yourself for years that what happened to you permanently defined you. You may have built an identity around being overlooked, betrayed, rejected, or underestimated. That identity may contain real pain. It deserves honesty. But pain and identity are not the same. What happened may explain parts of your thinking, but it does not have to govern every future decision. The past can teach you without owning you. This is one of the most liberating Stoic principles. You cannot change what has already happened, but you can change the relationship you maintain with it. The event is finished. What continues is the interpretation. Every time you replay it, you renew its emotional force. Every time you use it to predict the future, you allow an old moment to make a new decision. This does not mean pretending the past was harmless. It means refusing to let an irreversible event continue receiving unlimited authority over a life that is still unfolding. A disciplined mind learns to ask, what belongs to the past? And what belongs to this moment? Perhaps someone once betrayed your trust. That belongs to the past. The lesson may remain. The caution may remain. But the belief that no one can ever be trusted is a present choice. Perhaps you once failed publicly. The failure belongs to the past. The knowledge remains. The embarrassment may still visit. But the belief that you must never try again is a present choice. You may not control the first memory, but you can influence the meaning you repeatedly assign to it. Meaning is powerful. The same hardship can become a wound that never closes or a lesson that deepens character. The same rejection can become proof of worthlessness or evidence that survival is possible. The same uncertainty can become paralysis or an invitation to act with courage. The event may remain unchanged, but the direction of your life depends on what your mind does with it. This is why journaling was important to many Stoics. Marcus Aurelius was not writing for an audience. He was correcting his own mind. He reminded himself of what mattered because he knew the mind forgets. Under pressure, it forgets principles. Under anger, it forgets patience. Under praise, it forgets humility. Under fear, it forgets courage. Reflection brings the mind back into alignment. You do not need complex language. Sometimes, one honest sentence is enough. This is difficult, but it is not the end. I cannot control their reaction, but I can control my conduct. I am imagining the worst without evidence. My feelings are real, but they are not commands. These sentences are not magical affirmations. Their value comes from accuracy. They bring thought back toward reality. A useful mind does not always think positively. It thinks clearly. Positive thinking can become another form of denial when it refuses to acknowledge danger, loss, or limitation. Clear thinking sees the difficulty without adding unnecessary catastrophe. It admits, this may be painful, without saying, I will never recover. It says, I made a serious mistake, without saying, I am nothing but a mistake. It says, I do not know what will happen, without turning uncertainty into disaster. Clarity is stronger than forced optimism because clarity remains useful under pressure. When life becomes difficult, ask yourself 3 questions. First, what are the facts? Second, what am I adding through interpretation? Third, what action is available now? These questions return the mind from imagination to reality. The facts may be painful, but they are usually smaller than the story. The story says everything is ruined. The fact says one plan failed. The story says everyone has rejected you. The fact says one person said no. The story says you will always be alone. The fact says you feel lonely today. Language matters because the mind believes what it repeatedly hears. Words, such as always, never, everyone, and nothing often reveal emotional exaggeration. Nothing works out for me. Is that completely true? I always fail. Every time. Everyone is judging me. Every person. The goal is not to argue dishonestly with pain. It is to remove distortion so that you can respond to the real problem rather than an enlarged version created by fear. After facts and interpretation are separated, action becomes easier. Perhaps the available action is small. Send one message. Complete one task. Ask one question. Rest for one evening. Apologize. Begin again. The mind often demands a complete solution before taking the first step. Since no complete solution is available, it remains trapped in analysis. But life rarely changes through one perfect decision. It changes through many imperfect actions taken with consistency. Overthinking often feels productive because the mind is busy. Yet movement inside the mind is not always movement in life. You can spend hours analyzing every possible result and still remain exactly where you began. Overthinking creates the illusion of preparation while often avoiding the vulnerability of action. There comes a point when additional thought no longer creates clarity. It only creates more fear. At that point, discipline means choosing, not because certainty has appeared, but because enough information exists for the next step. The Stoics did not wait for complete emotional comfort before acting according to virtue. Courage was not a feeling. It was a decision to do what was right, while discomfort remained. Patience was not the absence of frustration. It was the refusal to let frustration dictate behavior. Temperance was not the absence of desire. It was the ability to place desire beneath judgment. This is the order a disciplined life requires. Judgment first. Impulse second. Most suffering occurs when this order is reversed. A thought appears. The body reacts. The person acts. Only afterward does reflection begin. By then, the message has been sent. The opportunity has been abandoned. The promise has been broken, or the relationship has been damaged. Mastery changes the sequence. A thought appears. The person notices it. They examine it. Then they choose. This process may take only a few seconds, but those seconds can protect years of peace. Breathing can help create that space. Not because breathing solves every problem, but because the body and mind continuously influence each other. When your breathing becomes slower, the body receives a signal that immediate danger may not be present. This gives reason more time to return. One deliberate breath before speaking can prevent an entire chain of regret. The simplest practices are often ignored because they do not feel dramatic. People search for a complete transformation while overlooking the power of a repeated pause. Yet character is built through small moments. One pause before anger, one question before assumption, one act before procrastination, one refusal before temptation. Repeated often enough, these moments become identity. You become someone who no longer reacts as quickly. You become someone who can tolerate uncertainty. You become someone who does not believe every fearful prediction. You become someone who can feel discomfort without immediately escaping it. That is how mental strength is built. quietly, privately, repeatedly. You must also become careful about what you allow into your mind. No one can maintain complete peace while feeding their attention with constant outrage, comparison, and fear. The mind absorbs what it repeatedly encounters. If the first thing you see every morning is conflict, bad news, and other people's carefully edited lives, your thoughts will begin the day in reaction. Attention is a form of nourishment. Some information strengthens judgment. Other information inflames emotion without producing useful action. The disciplined person asks not only whether something is true, but whether consuming it repeatedly is helping them live wisely. You do not need to know every opinion. You do not need to witness every argument. You do not need to respond to every controversy. The mind becomes clearer when unnecessary noise is reduced. Silence is not emptiness. It is space in which your own judgment can become audible again. Modern life trains people to fear this silence. The moment there is no stimulation, the hand reaches for a device. The moment a conversation pauses, someone searches for distraction. The moment discomfort appears, entertainment is used to escape it. Over time, the mind becomes unable to remain still. It requires constant input and loses the ability to examine itself. But a mind that cannot sit in silence cannot easily distinguish its own beliefs from the beliefs it has absorbed. Spend time without input. Walk without listening to anything. Sit for a few minutes without checking a screen. Let the mind reveal what it has been carrying. At first, this may feel uncomfortable. Unfinished thoughts will appear. Old worries will rise. Restlessness will demand escape. Stay long enough to observe. You may discover that many thoughts lose power when they are allowed to complete themselves. Anxiety often repeats because it is constantly interrupted but never examined. A fear begins. Distraction arrives, and the fear returns later. In silence, you can ask what the fear is actually trying to protect. Sometimes it points toward a real responsibility. Sometimes it is simply repeating an old habit. Not every thought deserves battle. Some disappear when ignored. Others require action. Wisdom is learning the difference. A thought about an unpaid responsibility may require action. A thought that everyone secretly dislikes you may require examination, not obedience. A memory that reveals unresolved guilt may require an apology. A random image of failure may require nothing at all. Mental mastery is not endless analysis. It is accurate response. There is another danger in the mind: comparison. Comparison rarely begins as a deliberate act. You see another person's success, appearance, confidence, relationship, or progress. And within seconds, the mind begins measuring your life against theirs. Their visible result becomes evidence of your invisible deficiency, but comparison is built on incomplete information. You see the outcome, not the cost. You see the moment, not the history. You see what they chose to reveal, not what they carry privately. Most importantly, you compare two different lives as though they were competing in the same race. A disciplined mind turns comparison into instruction. Instead of asking, "Why am I not them?" it asks, "What can I learn from this?" Admiration becomes useful when it creates direction rather than self-rejection. Your path does not need to resemble another person's path in order to be meaningful. The Stoics measured life through virtue, not status. The question was not whether you had more than someone else. The question was whether you were using what you had with wisdom, courage, justice, and self-control. This standard remains available in every circumstance. You may not control how quickly success arrives, but you can control whether you work honestly. You may not control another person's opinion, but you can control whether you behave with dignity. You may not control what you lose, but you can control what kind of person responds to the loss. This is where peace becomes possible, not because life becomes predictable, but because your standard no longer depends entirely on prediction when your mind is governed by external outcomes. Peace is always postponed. You will be calm when the result is guaranteed, confident when everyone approves, grateful when everything goes according to plan. But life does not offer these conditions for long. There will always be uncertainty. There will always be criticism. There will always be something unfinished. The Stoic does not wait for the world to become stable. They build stability inside the part of life that belongs to them. That stability is not created in one dramatic moment. It is created every morning when you choose what deserves attention, every afternoon when frustration appears, every evening when the mind replays the day. It is created through repetition. At the end of the day, review your thoughts without cruelty. Where did fear exaggerate? Where did anger speak too quickly? Where did you act wisely? Where did you surrender attention to something unworthy? The purpose is not punishment. It is correction. A sailor adjusts direction constantly. A small correction made early prevents a great distance from being traveled in the wrong direction. The same is true of thought. One day of resentment can become a habit. One habit can become a personality. But one moment of awareness can interrupt the pattern. Do not demand perfection from yourself. Perfectionism is another thought trap. It says that if you cannot control the mind completely, the effort is useless. This is false. Mastery is not a permanent state. It is a practice of returning. You will become distracted. Return. You will believe a fearful thought. Examine it. You will react impulsively. Repair what you can. You will lose perspective. Begin again. Every return strengthens the path. Think of the mind as a wild horse. It does not become steady because it is beaten. It becomes steady through patient training. Harshness may create temporary obedience, but it does not create trust. The same applies to self-discipline. Constant self-criticism does not always improve thinking. Often, it produces shame. And shame makes honest observation more difficult. Speak to yourself with firmness, but also fairness. Correct the thought without attacking the person. Sigh. This interpretation is not helping. Rather than, I am hopeless. Sigh. I avoided responsibility today. Rather than, I will never change. Accurate language leaves room for action. Cruel language turns a mistake into identity. Your inner voice becomes the atmosphere in which your life is lived. If that atmosphere is constantly hostile, even success will feel unsafe. You will achieve something and immediately hear why it is not enough. You will rest and hear that you are lazy. You will make progress and hear that others are further ahead. A disciplined inner voice does not flatter. It guides. It acknowledges progress without becoming complacent. It confronts mistakes without destroying dignity. It says, you can do better, and the next opportunity begins now. This voice must be practiced because the mind often repeats the voices it heard in the past. Criticism from years ago can become internal language long after the speaker is gone. You may believe you are hearing your own judgment when you are actually repeating someone else's fear. Anger or limitation. Ask yourself, whose voice is this? When the mind says you are incapable, where did that belief begin? When it says mistakes are unacceptable, who taught you that worth depends on perfection? When it says rest must be earned through exhaustion, where did that standard come from? Awareness allows you to return beliefs that were never truly yours. Then you can choose a better standard. Not an easier one, but a wiser one. Effort instead of perfection. Progress instead of comparison. Responsibility instead of shame. Courage instead of certainty. Character instead of image. The mind will still resist. Old patterns feel natural because they have been repeated. New thoughts may initially feel artificial. This does not mean they are false. It means they are unfamiliar. A person who has spent years expecting rejection may feel uncomfortable when they begin trusting themselves. A person trained to criticize every effort may feel dishonest when acknowledging progress. Change often feels wrong before it feels natural because familiarity is mistaken for truth. Continue anyway. Every time you question an old belief, you loosen its hold. Every time you act against a fearful prediction, you create new evidence. Every time you choose patience over reaction, you prove that impulse is not your master. Eventually, the mind begins learning from your behavior. Confidence does not always come before action. Often, action teaches the mind what is possible. You speak despite nervousness, and the mind learns that nervousness can be survived. You begin despite uncertainty, and the mind learns that certainty is not required. You set a boundary despite guilt, and the mind learns that discomfort does not mean wrongdoing. You fail and continue, and the mind learns that failure is not death. This is how thought and action reshape each other. You do not wait for perfect thoughts before living. You live wisely enough that your thoughts begin changing. There will still be moments when the mind becomes loud, nights when old memories return, days when uncertainty feels heavier than usual, conversations that awaken anger, setbacks that make progress seem invisible. In those moments, remember that the goal is not to feel powerful. The goal is to remain present. Return to the facts. Return to the breath. Return to what is under your control. Return to the next action. The mind may demand answers about the next 5 years. Give it the responsibility of the next 5 minutes. What can be done now? Perhaps nothing can be solved immediately. Then patience becomes the action. Perhaps an answer must wait. Then waiting without creating disaster is the discipline. Perhaps the outcome belongs to someone else. Then your conduct remains yours. This is the center of Stoic freedom. Not control over everything, but clear ownership over something. Your judgment, your intention, your response. The world can place obstacles in front of you. It can delay results. It can misunderstand you. It can remove what you value. But before it controls your inner life, it must pass through your interpretation. Guard that gate. Do not allow every opinion to enter. Do not allow every fear to become prophecy. Do not allow every memory to become identity. Do not allow every impulse to become action. Your mind is powerful. It can build prisons from assumptions, but it can also build freedom through clarity. It can keep old pain alive, but it can also turn pain into wisdom. It can imagine defeat, but it can also prepare courage. The same instrument that has created suffering can become the instrument of liberation, but only when you stop treating thought as destiny. You are not required to follow every road the mind presents. Some roads lead back to resentment. Some lead toward fear. Some lead into endless comparison. You can notice the road and refuse to walk it. Choose the thought that produces honest action. Choose the interpretation that remains close to reality. Choose the question that returns power to your hands. And when the mind asks, "What if everything goes wrong?" answer with another question. What if I become stronger by responding well? When it says, "I cannot handle this," remind it, "I do not have to handle the entire future today." When it says, "This feeling will last forever," answer, "No feeling has ever remained unchanged." When it says, "I need everyone to understand me," answer, "I need to understand my own values clearly." This is not empty motivation. It is mental leadership. Every strong life requires it. Someone must decide what your thoughts mean. Someone must choose which fears deserve preparation and which deserve release. Someone must determine whether the past will remain a teacher or become a ruler. That someone is you. Master your thoughts before they master you. Because what begins as a silent sentence can eventually become an entire life. A thought becomes a belief. A belief becomes a habit. A habit becomes character. Character becomes direction. Change the direction early. Pause before believing. Question before reacting. Act before overthinking grows into paralysis. And forgive yourself quickly enough to continue learning. You will never control every thought that enters your mind, but you can become the one who decides which thoughts remain, which thoughts receive energy, and which thoughts are allowed to guide your feet. That is enough. You do not need a perfectly silent mind. You need a mind that knows where to return. Return to truth. Return to responsibility. Return to the present. Return to yourself. Because the greatest form of power is not the ability to control the world around you. It is the ability to remain the author of your inner world when everything around you is demanding a reaction. The storm may speak loudly. Fear may make predictions. Memory may reopen old doors. But beneath all of that noise, there is still a place within you that can observe, choose, and act with dignity. Protect that place. Strengthen it every day. And when your thoughts attempt to become your master, remind them that they are only visitors. You are the one who decides which of them may stay.